Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be looking at the new balanced data slate that just came out today. And I have to say, I took a quick look at both the balanced data slate and the Unitorium field manual, the points changes, and there's a lot to talk about, especially with the Eldar, because we did see some nerfs, unfortunately, which I truly believe was a little bit unwarranted, and we did see a few buffs. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. First, let's go ahead and look at the balanced data slate. So there is a couple of important changes here, and I will also go over the changes briefly from the other armies and how it affects us. And there's some good news here. There's some, considerable nerfs to certain units that were really pounding us, and, they're no longer going to be as big of an issue. But there's also some changes to some other things. So let's go ahead and talk about them. So the first thing is modifying a stratagem CP cost. This doesn't really apply to us too much because we don't have a lot of these abilities, but essentially what happened is when you target something with a, ability like this that, you know, basically makes a CP or a stratagem 0 CP, instead of that, it's going to just reduce it by 1. So there's no more kind of, you can only target certain units with battle tactic stratagems. If you have one of these abilities, you can use any stratagem, but it's only going to reduce it by 1 CP. That means, yes, people will get free Overwatch and things like that again, even if it doesn't specifically mention Overwatch, but they can't use it for 2 CP stratagems to just make it free. So there's none of that. That doesn't really affect us too much though, so let's move on. Stratagems that can be used more than once per turn or phase. Now this one does affect us in that there's 2 Phoenix Lords that we have that both do this. First of all, Azurman. Azurman allows us to use a second Overwatch if it's in the same phase. GW has clarified, and this was pretty much already the case anyway, but some TOs are ruling it one way or the other. GW has now said, yes, you can do it. So we'll read it together so that everybody's clear on this. Azurman, if you Overwatch with something else first, during the same phase, you can also Overwatch with Azurman's unit for free, which would be a unit of Dire Avengers. So, parts of a rule that allow a player to use a stratagem even if they have already targeted another unit with the stratagem in the same phase can only be used if the name of the stratagem is specified in that rule, which it is for those units. Similarly, if a stratagem is limited to 1 use per phase or per turn, example, Fire Overwatch, per battle round or per battle, such parts of that rule can only be used if the name of the stratagem is specified in that rule again. So, Azurman's ability targets Overwatch. It can indeed be used twice in the same phase alongside another friendly Overwatch. Same thing with Jane Czar's Heroic Intervention. Heroic Intervention can be used twice in the same phase if you have Jane Czar, which is pretty big as well. We have several units that really benefit from Heroic Intervention that have fights first. Things like the Autarch Wayleaper. Of course, Jane Czar's unit herself. Perhaps even another unit, Howling Banshees. We have tons of cheap combat units that can easily benefit from this ability as well. So yes, 2 CP, you're not always going to have 2 CP lying around, but if you have Jane Czar, you can use 2 Heroic Interventions, which is pretty cool. So that is a slight buff, and Jane Czar got another buff that I'll talk about later. Stratagems that prevent units from being targeted. This is a huge one. We don't have any of these abilities in our army, so this is just a buff for us. Basically, if a stratagem has an effect that says the target unit can only be selected as a target of a range attack if the attacking model is within 12, then it is changed to 18. So you can't fire at me if you're within 12, basically making a whole unit lone operative, is now 18 inches instead, which is huge. A lot of armies had this ability, and it's been progressively nerfed for armies that were a problem, and now it's just everybody follows the same rule. It's 18 inches, which is big. So, Canoptic Wraiths, they can no longer use that stratagem to basically become lone operative within 12. They will now be, basically 18 inches, which is a big buff. Stratagems that add units to your army. Now, again, this is one that the Eldar don't have to worry about because we don't add units to our army. We are not Gene Stealer Cult, we are not, Imperial Guard and other stuff. But check this out. It's been hugely nerfed. Stratagems with this ability are now limited to once per game. So if a stratagem has the effect of adding a new unit to your army that is identical to the destroyed unit, and they give some examples, join the hunt, unending wave, reinforcements, etc., add the following restriction to that stratagem. You can only use this stratagem once per battle. Now, I don't believe this actually affects Gene Stealer Cult because I think that's their army special rule, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I believe it's their army rule, so they can do it as many times as you roll for it. But I believe they also got some nerfs as well, so there is that. And yeah, so this means that basically for all you players out there who are having big trouble against Imperial Guard, now they can only use it once per game. Reinforcements is a once per game stratagem, and it is done. So, I have mixed feelings about this personally. Actually, I think this wasn't the kind of uninteractive broken part about the Guard. I thought this was perfectly fine. I thought the broken part of the Imperial Guard was the indirect fire spam that they could levy against other armies. I know a lot of players say that the indirect fire wasn't cost effective, but the truth of the matter is that it was very uninteractive, and the Guard player really didn't have to do anything. It was just, you could just basically sit in the back, not interact with your opponent whatsoever with those units, and just kill stuff. And that was, of course, kind of overpowered. Not in a I'm going to win every tournament way, but in a this isn't fun way and this isn't interactive way. So yeah, that's the problem I thought with Imperial Guard, but apparently GW went the other way with this and said reinforcements, not good. We have a lot of battle line, bonuses that we're going to be handing out in Pariah Nexus, so we're going to limit this to once per battle. So that's kind of a shame for Imperial Guard players. IG did get a few buffs here and there, but we'll talk about those later. Onward to the army rules. So I'm just going to make this short and quick. Eldar didn't get anything. Adeptus Mechanicus got big buffs, basically either an army-wide buff to ballistic skill or, weapon skill. That's very good. And then, of course, if they choose the ballistic skill in combat, they get -1 to hit, or enemies need -1 to hit, basically, to actually hit them. And then the melee version of this gives you an armor penetration characteristic of +1, or, additional -1. This is very good. And I just want to say this right now. I think Adeptus Mechanicus is more than fixed. If anything, they are just better. Now, some of the things they did apparently nerf were the attacks on some of these units. I guess that kind of makes sense. I don't know much about Adeptus Mechanicus. I haven't actually played against them this edition, gotta be honest. But from what I hear, they're not good. And I think that's mostly because a lot of their units were just kind of subpar, hitting on a 4+, and then also being kind of, not dirt cheap, but, kind of at that level where they were like chaff, and they just really weren't a great army in general. So got a lot of their attacks characteristics nerfed, but that's about it there. So they're looking actually pretty good, though, in general. We come to the Aeldari. We have no new buffs or nerfs here, which is unfortunate. I was hoping Strands of Fate would be buffed. They would buff it from 6 to, 9 or something else. But they didn't do anything here, unfortunately. No no Phantasm buff. No Eldrad buff to make it so that, his Diviner of Futures did something different. Nothing. So, nothing here. However, I am going to take a look at the Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum, real quick, because they do have something new, that is Born Soldiers. So they got a buff and a nerf at the same time. And a lot of people are probably going to be talking about this as a win for the Imperial Guard, but again, it is a loss for indirect fire. Basically, it says, each time a regiment unit from your army makes a range attack that targets a visible unit, excluding monsters and vehicles, that attack has the lethal hits ability. So, what that means is that guard units, like your bog standard infantrymen, are no longer going to be effective against monsters and vehicles. Also, I know that, basilisks and stuff like that, they don't have the regiment keyword, but it says visible, right? So that means basilisks and, indirect fire units really can't be affected by this. Now, this really kind of hits more to this, which is each time a model in a squadron unit, again, basilisks, manticores, etc., from your army makes a range attack that targets a visible monster or vehicle. That model has lethal hits. So not only are they not getting it because it has to be visible, but they're not getting it against infantry. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Imperial Guard players, but I believe that basilisks, manticores, they're all squadrons. So they all have the squadron keyword. So they will get it if they have line of sight to a monster or vehicle, but that's it. Now, some people will be saying this is a good buff because they don't have to be stationary anymore. That's the big buff here. No more, I have to be stationary to get it. Unfortunately, it's only against a certain type of target. So regiment units do not get lethal hits against monsters and vehicles, and that's the target they want lethal hits against. And then, of course, squadron units don't get lethal hits against infantry or mounted or anything else. And a lot of times that's actually really good because, squadron vehicles, Leman Russ battle tanks, or Goldorns, they have a lot of auxiliary weapons, heavy bolters and stuff that are going to be targeting infantry units, and they're not going to be able to get that lethal hits against those targets. Only monsters and vehicles. What do I think about this? Well, in general, you guys know I used to play Imperial Guard quite a bit when I was younger and, kind of up to really 6th edition before I sold the army because I just didn't really like how it played. Thought they were pretty boring. And, they're cool and everything, but I just thought they were a little boring. I don't really think that this is a good buff. I think that a lot of times it's going to be, a matter of it's good when it happens, and when it doesn't happen, oh well, you know, that's just how it is. I think it is a buff for things like Leman Russ battle tanks that are going to go against bigger stuff. But in general, I think it's going to be a little bit iffy, you know. So that's my thoughts on it. Other than that, I mean, the Imperial Guard, they look pretty much the same. I don't think they're getting a huge, they're going to be strong in Pry Nexus because of all the battle line buffs and stuff like that, but I really think they got more nerfed than they did buffed this time around, at least with the army rules. They got a few buffs when it came to points and stuff, which we'll talk about. Now, there's a lot of things here which I don't really know, so I'm not going to, dive into it because I'm not an expert on, like, for example, Chaos Knights. I don't know if that's exactly a buff or a nerf there with their super heavy walker ability. I'm sure it's just because they changed part of the core rules, but it is what it is there. And yes, they did change some of the core rules, specifically how models pivot, which I'll talk about at the end of this. And yeah, I just think certain armies got nerfs. Like, for example, I don't know if Chaos Demons got nerfed or buffed by this. I would assume it's a small nerf to the ability to choose battle line units for your army. Same thing with Dark Angels. I'm assuming that's a slight... Well, no, I think this is a slight buff, actually, to Deathwing. Because Deathwing was terrible. And what I mean by Deathwing is like their Terminators and stuff. So I think it's a slight buff to them. What else? Looks like I think they might have gotten slightly buffed here, the Deathwing Knights. Either getting an extra AP value or an extra damage value. But again, I may be wrong on that. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Drukhari specifically got nothing. No changes, which is fine because they were fine. Imperial Knights, same thing. Super Heavy Walker got changed. I think that's just because of the movement thing. Leagues of Otan. Basically, they look the same to me. I mean, maybe the Onslaught got nerfed a little bit at higher points, but that's about it. Yeah, I don't think there's much changes there, but correct me if I'm wrong. Hypercrypt Legion Detachment got nerfed, excluding monster units. No more teleporting Catan shards. So this is the one I saw the other day, and I was like, oh, okay. Right? Cosmic Precision cannot basically target a Catan shard, throw them within 3 inches of the enemy, and, that's it. I think that's fair, honestly. I think that was kind of stupid to begin with, but there we go. Monster units are excluded. However, vehicle units are not, so I think you can still do it with the monolith. I know the monolith is towering, but this doesn't say excludes towering, so I think they're still good on that. Green Tide got nerfed. Big surprise there, right? Now they're just going to have a 6+ invul instead of a 5+ invul army wide. That's pretty massive, guys. I think Green Tide is going to kind of go the way of the dodo here just because of that. If they are more than 10, though, they do get a 5+ invulnerable save. So that's good. Actually, you know what? Maybe I take that back just slightly. Basically, still have the 5+ invul. They just don't get to reroll the ones part. So they just got rid of that, and they changed a little bit so that they're more vulnerable when they're less than 10 models. So, this gives you the ability, if you kill half the unit, the other half is just going to have a 6+ invul. So that's pretty good. Tide of Muscle adds 1 to the charge roll, and if your unit contains 10 or more models, you can reroll the charge roll. This is a huge nerf. By the way, guys, if you didn't know this, Tide of Muscle means that you essentially get +1 for each battle round that you're, in for your charge distance. This was insane, and people were abusing this in rounds 5 to basically guarantee charges across the map. So can't do that anymore, especially with like the weird boy and stuff like that. It was just insane. So no more of that. Just gives +1, and you can re-roll it if you're more than 10, which you probably will be. Go get them. You just can re-roll the distance, the d6 to determine how far you can move. I think it was like, if I'm not mistaken, it was like an auto 6 or something like that beforehand. Now you just re-roll. So, anyway. And then Mega Knobs, they get a 5+ Feel No Pain instead of a 4+. That's a big nerf. So no more 4+ Feel No Pain for Mega Knobs, and I believe they got points increased too, but we'll look at that later. Space Wolves, looks like they got a nerf to their sagas. Again, I don't really play that many Space Wolf players, but I know that people were complaining about Thunderwolf Cavalry, so they probably got nerfed. Thousand Suns, this is a big nerf. Basically, the Cabal of Sorcerers ability allowed one of their sorcerers to basically channel all of their Cabal abilities. Now, each sorcerer can only do it once. So no more double Doombolt shenanigans, no more, I'm just going to kill everything from one Psyker, and then the next turn I'm going to do the same thing and hide. By the way, that's how Thousand Suns players basically played, if you guys don't know. They would basically teleport something, Exalted Sorcerer, something like that, across the battlefield. They'd Doombolt you twice, and then, they'd sacrifice the Exalted Sorcerer, but they'd always trade up. And then they'd kind of hide the rest of their army, or maybe pop forward and flame something to death, and then, it was just a very uninteractive army to play against, very difficult to play against as well, especially people who knew how to play Thousand Suns. So they got nerfed big time. Again, Doombolt, it looks like it excludes models with Lone Operative. So this is big too, because Doombolt was ignoring Lone Op. It was ignoring things like that. So basically, you select one enemy unit within 18 and visible to the Psyker. Again, gotta be visible. Excluding units with Lone Operative ability that are not part of an attached unit and not within 12. That's pretty big, right? So they can't just Doombolt or Autark Wayleaper off the board very easily anymore and just ignore line of sight. That's not a thing. Or ignore Lone Operative, excuse me. Temporal Surge. The same unit cannot be targeted for this ritual more than once per phase. This is big too. This was the teleport ability, I believe. So, or the normal move ability, I should say. So things like, Magnus and stuff like that, just being able to just run across the board. Can't be targeted twice with it. Exalted Sorcerer on Disc of Tzeentch. I don't know what this ability did really, but now it's just going to be just like the Night Spinner ability. It's going to be no different. Okay, Tyranids got a buff. I'm not going to go into this. It looks like they just got their Synapse army rule buffed and some Shadow Warp things buffed. A couple of their detachment buffs as well, because to be honest, they needed it. And it looks like World Eaters also got a couple of buffs here and there that gave them, I think here it's a 5+ invulnerable save, which is, I think, better. But again, World Eaters aren't my specialty, so I don't know. You guys would have to tell me in the comments if you notice anything about that. So in general, lots of nerfs to units and to armies that needed it. But no changes to Eldar, even though we were sitting at 47, 48%. So we were below 50%, but GW did not do anything to our rules at all. Nor did they Drukhari, and they were at 51. So, that's just how it crumbles sometimes. If it was just that, it would be fine. Now let's take a look. Oh, I was going to mention as well, I don't know if they actually have it posted on the website, but they'll probably have it in the core rules. We'll check that out if they have it posted. I know they mentioned it in the article, and basically for pivoting. Now, I know a lot of you guys use wave serpents and fire prisms and things. Maybe you guys don't play with this rule at your local game store with your buddies or whatever. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Depends who I'm playing against and what they're comfortable with and what they're doing and how they're moving their models. But you need to pay for every inch you pivot. So if you pivot an inch, that's an inch off your movement. So a wave serpent, for example, that's behind a ruin might end up pivoting about 4 inches to be able to kind of move around that ruin and out of that ruin into line of sight and stuff. I try my best, to position my wave serpents or falcons in a way where I could just move straight forward, but that's not always possible, especially when you're trying to hide multiple tanks. So now what it is, instead of having to spend all those, each time you pivot, having to spend certain movement points, you just spend 2 inches to pivot once. It doesn't matter how far you pivot or how much you pivot, it's 2 inches off your movement. Then you don't have to spend movement for every other pivot you make. It's massive. It's a huge buff to skimmers. It's a huge buff to models that, have to spend a bunch of points pivoting and all that crap. And it's really just, in my opinion, better for the game. I hated the fact that you had to spend so many movement points pivoting and all this stuff. I mean, you kind of had to devise ways, I don't know about you guys, but devise ways turn 1 to like position your models so that you didn't have to pivot it, pivot the least amount as possible. GW has gotten rid of this and says you spend 2 inches to pivot and then you can pivot as much as you want for the rest of the movement. Fantastic move by GW. Thank you. Didn't think they were going to do that, honestly. That came as a surprise. So that's awesome. Let's go ahead and check out some other stuff. So we have the field manual here, which is the point changes. And we're going to go right to the Eldar. No surprise here. Adeptus Sororitas got a bunch of nerfs. Again, no surprise. They were really OP before. Adeptus Custodes got a bunch of buffs. Again, no surprise. They were near the end of the list. Adeptus Mechanicus got a bunch of nerfs because their army ability is just so much better now. So they got buffs, or nerfs, excuse me. Which makes sense. They're more elite now, basically. So that's why a lot of their stuff is more expensive. Makes sense. This is what Mechanicus players were complaining about. Okay, we get to the Aeldari. Now, some of you guys are seeing the red, and some of you guys have probably already read this. But essentially, when I saw red on here, I was already, there was already red flags, so to speak, going up in my mind. Like, are these even warranted? What is GW doing? And stuff like that. So I tried to calm myself down a little bit and actually just kind of analyze it when I first read this, because my first impression was I was kind of ticked off, to be honest with you. Just as somebody who really loves the Eldar and just saw their win rate slipping and, really didn't see any major problems with the index at all. Seeing a bunch of units in red just kind of threw me off. But then, of course, I saw that there was green as well, and I thought, okay, well, maybe they balance a couple things out. So first off, Azurman got a points decrease. Now, what I will say about Azurman, of course, with the points decrease, he is looking better, but I still don't think he's, all that great. I like Azurman, don't get me wrong, but, we'd have to use Dire Avengers to really make him good. And I'm just not sure Dire Avengers are super good, especially with the nerfs to Green Tide, with the nerfs to, kind of some other factions that, Dire Avengers might have been good against. I don't know if Dire Avengers and Azurman are really, necessary. But anyway, he got a buff for you Azurman lovers out there, the old ass man. He got a buff. He had his prostate exam, and apparently everything was great. So, Jane Czar got a points decrease. Awesome. Jane Czar is great, and I actually think she's even better in Pariah Nexus because she gets free heroic intervention, and that's a very powerful ability. Banshees also got reduced last balance Dataslate or last, points changes. So, all in all, a unit of Banshees and Jane Czar comes in at 160, which is a very good bundle in my opinion for a unit that can basically heroically intervene and wipe out a good number of enemy infantry. especially when you see, enemy infantry armies on the rise, things like Grey Knights. Howling Banshees are super good into Grey Knights. They're super good into anything that wants to engage you in combat that has power armor. So definitely a unit to look out for there. And even Jane's are just solo, by the way, guys, just, sitting behind a piece of terrain. Because a lot of indirect fire stuff did get nerfed, she has a better chance of surviving because I don't think as many players, especially guard players, are going to be taking a lot of indirect fire. I guarantee you guard players are probably going to look elsewhere for their damage. And they're going to need to because, and I may be wrong on this, but I highly suspect that Imperial Guard will not be bringing as much indirect in the future. We have Cahandras, which he got reduced. Again, I thought he was good at 100 points, but he got reduced to 90. Magun Ra got reduced, not by enough in my opinion. And again, the reason I say that is mainly because I just don't think he does anything for the unit that he joins, like Dark Reapers. He really doesn't add anything to them, and there's a lot of things like, for example, the Death Jester, who's just better than him. For me to consider Magun Ra, I would have to see him at like 95 points. And I'm being just dead honest with you. If he's not cheaper than a Death Jester, there's really no reason to take him. That's just my competitive opinion. But, of course, he's great in, semi-competitive games if you can run him right. He's awesome with Dark Reapers if you can manage to, roll a 2+ on your, on your Phantasm, or 3+ maybe even because he has a huge base, right? So he's good in those scenarios. Void Weaver got decreased by 10 points. Not enough. I never thought it should have gotten nerfed in the first place in the very beginning. I know they wanted to nerf it in response to people just maybe replacing the Fire Prism with it, but it's not a Fire Prism, and it doesn't do nearly enough damage. So, I think at a 115 it's better, but it's not the best. So if you guys are thinking like Void Weavers are going to become big, I don't think so unless you're running Pure Quins and you're doing it for a fun reason. Then yeah, it's a great buff. But other than that, not really. Viper getting reduced to 75 points. This is where it should have been at all edition. It got changed because, of course, people were kind of afraid of Strands of Fate and stuff like that, and everything that could benefit from Bright Lance was nerfed. But, Viper at 75 points, I like the Viper. I think he was decent at 85. I just think he was outcompeted. Now, there's more of a reason to take it, especially alongside things like Wind Riders. And I think you're going to be seeing a lot of Wind Riders coming up in competitive play, especially now. We saw them in competitive play before, and now I just think the meta is going to explode with them. I think we're going to see a ton of them, and the Viper is going to go alongside well with those. Okay, on to the nerfs. We got Dark Reapers. They got nerfed by 5 points. And again, I think purely it's because of the Tempest Launcher. And that's it. I think Dark Reapers are going to still be decent. They're still good against things like Sisters of Battle, or, light infantry and Imperial Guard using mortar teams, although I think those are pretty much dead in the water, but we'll see. And, they're good against light infantry, definitely when they can, kind of get on the perch. So 5 point, nerf, unless you're like running ×3, it's not going to be that big of a deal, but it still kind of irks me a little bit because it's really just because of the Tempest Launcher that the whole unit's getting punished, in my opinion. Warp Spiders got nerfed to 125. This was bigger. This was by 10 points. And I think the problem with this is that maybe GW saw Pariah Nexus because you can't advance and use actions anymore, and Warp Spiders don't advance when they warp jump. They just thought that was too powerful. They were like, oh, Warp Spiders can move 24, complete an action, be totally out of line of sight. They need to be nerfed. I guess that's what it is. But again, Warp Spiders got nerfed. That's kind of sad. You might not see people running ×3 anymore. Maybe not even ×2. It just depends how things shake out. They're just really expensive, So 2 units of these is about 1/8 of your army. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but for 2 units of 5 that can easily be killed, they're super easy to kill. It's a lot of points. Skyweavers are up by 10 points. And, the thing is, they're good, no doubt, but they're kind of at that level right now where they're 105 points. Yes, Haywire will do an average of 6 damage. 2 vehicles, ignore their armor, ignore their invulns, all that. That's great. But, is it are they better than, I guess, what would be a comparison unit? I guess, are they better than like 5 fire dragons, at dealing with tanks? Fire dragons probably will do more than 6 damage to tanks, even heavy ones. Fire prisms, is 2 of these units, is 4 of these guys worth a fire prism? I mean, I know they were kind of like worth that before anyway. They were about the same cost. I mean, maybe, it's just, I don't know. I don't think they deserve the nerf really, but there we go. They got nerfed. A lot of competitive players were running them, so it makes sense. Haywire is very strong. I still think people will run these, just depending on the meta. Haywire is very strong. However, the Void Weaver being 115, I don't know. Maybe you give this thing the Haywire cannon or whatever. I would have to look at the stats again of the Haywire cannon, see if it's comparable, but I mean, hey, that's a thought. Fire Dragons, 90 points, so they got nerfed by 5 points. I didn't expect this. I really didn't. I guess it's because Fire Dragons are going to be really good in the new meta, and they just figured, oh, let's preemptively nerf Fire Dragons because we know they're going to be really strong into a lot of armies. I don't know why they nerfed them. They were, run a lot of competitive lists, but there was also lists that they just weren't run. So, they weren't in every list, which kind of threw me off a little bit. They weren't like Warp Spiders who were in basically every list. Swooping Hawks got nerfed again. And I guess it's because they're going to be really good in Pariah Nexus or something like that. But my problem with this is that, and we'll look at the Drukhari nerfs or buffs in just a second, but I believe from the top of my head, Mandrakes had the same ability Swooping Hawks have, and they did not get points nerfed. And, in my mind, what exactly am I paying for with the Swooping Hawks if not for their ability, right? I'm paying for their ability, but yet the Dark Eldar have the same kind of unit, which does the same thing, and they didn't get a points nerf on Mandrakes. So what do I think? Well, I think maybe GW wants to sell some Mandrakes, right, in their new Kill Team kit. That's the only explanation I can come for why those weren't nerfed. So there we go. Mandrakes weren't nerfed at all. Swooping Hawks were. No idea why, but there we go. Swooping Hawks are 85 points. I still think they're pretty much an auto-include to take a couple units of these. That's how it is. I think the biggest disappointment, though, was Yvrain being nerfed to 125. I think that's a shame. Because it's another tax. It's basically an unofficial tax on Ynnari. Again, Ynnari is going to be very good in Pariah Nexus. They're going to be able to take things like Kabbalite Warriors, which are really good battle line units. You have some really good options there. So, unfortunately, Yvrain getting nerfed kind of stings a little bit. But it is what it is. If you run Ynnari, you're going to be down 25 points essentially because of this. But that's not a huge deal in the wider scope of things, but still kind of lame. The Wraithlord got a buff. So this is the last buff we're going to be talking about. And we have one more nerf to talk about. Now, I did a video on Wraithlords a little bit ago, and I said that I predicted Wraithlords would be really good in Pariah Nexus, and I think they are. I think they have all the right tools to be good against what's kind of evolving in the current meta. And they got a points decrease, which is great. Thumbs up. That's awesome. I think it probably should have been 140, but I'll take 145. I think you might start seeing Wraithlords more, here and there. A 145 unit that can trade well in the midboard and bait out, stronger units that now have to kill that Wraithlord, which means units like your Fire Prisms, units like, if you take Warwalkers, although, I mean, they're not nerfed or anything, but I still think I don't know about Warwalkers. I just did a video about them and I said, unless the Bright Lance is considerably buffed somehow, I think they're probably going to be a unit that's not taken in 3s or 2s anymore. But I could be wrong about that. I think the Wraithlord compares much better to Warwalker now. It is 35 points more than a Warwalker, which does sound like a lot, but you're getting, if you wanted to, you can still get 2 Bright Lances on it. Or you can go the other direction and just have it, basically be able to kill mech targets better. I don't know what the best answer is. I think a combination of both might be a good thing, right? 1 Star Cannon, 1 Bright Lance. Bright Lance so you can overwatch effectively and use a Strands dice to, plug that in and get a 6. And, at that point the ballistic skill doesn't really matter. And then the Star Cannon, if you use your reroll on the Star Cannon, you have about a 50% chance, roughly, of getting a hit with one of those, which, it does add 2 damage to whatever you're doing, unless you're going against like a heavier vehicle. So that's decent as well. And of course, you can also use your wound reroll on the Star Cannon and stuff, against higher toughness targets. Again, it's not a guarantee you're going to get a wound, but it does give you a little bit more power against Marines. And it doesn't seem like a lot on paper. It's like 1 extra kill versus 2 Bright Lances. But sometimes you need that 1 extra kill, especially in combat. Wraithlord hits on 4s, guys, right? If you're going against like a unit of 5, Warp Talons, or a unit of 5, you know, Grey Knights or something like that, right? And you don't kill, you kill all of them but 1, well, it gets its attacks back, and it might do some damage, and then it locks you into combat, and then they could just shoot you to death, and maybe they need less to kill you. I don't know. So I think maybe that's a play. But, I think 2 Bright Lances on this guy is still good. Tried and true Bright Lances I don't think are a bad option either. Just depends on how the meta kind of evolves, and I think it depends what else your list has as well. And that's something I didn't mention in the Wraithlord video, but if you're packing some serious anti-marine firepower with Wind Riders and a Farseer on a jet bike and stuff, yeah, maybe you don't need the Star Cannon, maybe you just go with the extra Bright Lance just to have your coverages. But anyway, Wraithlord being less, I think, is a great thing. And overall, what do I think? Oh, one more thing. We forgot the last nerf, of course. They just had to pile it on the Shadow Spectres for an extra nerf. And I think they've basically nerfed every Eldar unit that has a move, shoot, move ability. Yes, they did nerf Scourges, in case you're wondering. And we'll talk about that in a second. So 115 points for 5. It's 230 for 10. They still are good, but they're going to be really expensive. And I think the problem with it is, at this point, they're really cost ineffective when you compare them to Wind Riders at dealing with Marines. Against Hordes, it's kind of the same thing. They're not very cost effective unless you're dealing with a low toughness Horde like Imperial Guard Infantry or Termagants, Hormagants, things with T3. Against T3 Hordes, maybe even T4 Hordes with low armor, they're fantastic, and they're probably still better than Wind Riders. But and only because of the blast. And when I say Horde, I mean, 15 models or higher. But against other stuff, Space Marines, or, kind of light vehicles and stuff like that, I don't think they're as good because their volume of shots is just much lower. So, Shadow Spectres, and they're still good. I don't think we have Capture Enemy Outpost anymore, I believe. I'd have to double check, but I don't think that's in the Pariah mission deck for Pariah Nexus. So that whole strategy where you could kind of, use them with a fire and fade in their movement to get onto, their home objective turn 1, if that came up, that's gone. So I just think they're very mission dependent now. If you're going into a tournament and you know that there's a mission or a board layout that they could be very good in, I think they're a good unit, especially if the meta evolves into a more Horde type kind of meta. I think they're very good, a low toughness Horde meta. Like if all of a sudden we see Imperial Guard players exploding with infantry Hordes, which I don't think so because of the nerf to reinforcements. Or if we see Tyranids explode again with a bunch of Hormagons and Termagants and stuff, and running Hordes like that because their Spore Mines and stuff can't score secondaries anymore because they have 0 OC, then I think Shadow Spectres might be great still, even at 115. But then again, there are other units that can deal with those types of units, so I don't know where Shadow Spectres fit into that at 115 points. So we'll just have to see, So what do I think overall of the Eldar nerfs? Then we'll get into the Dark Eldar and the Ynnari thoughts. Well, okay, so this is going to sound kind of, and I don't mean this to sound like pessimistic, because I'm happy that some things got buffed that needed it. A lot of our Phoenix Lords were terrible. Those got buffed. A lot of the, more mediocre units, B tier units in the index got buffed. The Wraithlord was a B tier unit because of its cost. Got what it needed. Viper, same kind of thing. Good, but considered a luxury by a lot of players. That's cheaper. And, etc. So, I think my problem with this is that players are getting punished. Eldar players, especially competitive ones that are playing in tournaments and winning with these types of armies, are getting punished for playing the faction as it's meant to be played, as a very fast, hard-hitting faction. Those units are getting punished. Namely, Aspect Warriors. Aspect Warriors are good, don't get me wrong, but they were, they're not OP. Outside of a few in the beginning of the edition that were way undercosted, people could argue Swooping Hawks were maybe an 80-point unit and they were 75, or Warp Spiders were 100 points base and, they got increased to 115. Maybe some of those changes were needed early on, but I think at this point, with the nerfs that we've seen and the relative Eldar success, yes, when we have had Eldar victories, those lists are very powerful and they make it look easy. If you ever watch any of these games, these Eldar players are really good in competitive play. But I think Eldar players are getting punished for playing high skill cap, very hard to use units. Like, Skyweavers, they're a hard to use unit. You can't just throw them out there and do 6 damage and expect that that's going to be an even trade. You got to do something else with them as well. At the same time, you got to move block with them, or you got to do some utility thing, right? So them getting nerfed like that, kind of unfortunate. Warp Spiders, again, getting nerfed like that, kind of unfortunate. They're another high skill unit. Some players might disagree with me there, but I guess you don't play Eldar because you've never known sometimes when your opponent is good and knows how to stop your Warp Spiders, how that feels. And when you have, 115 point, now 125 point unit sitting in your backfield, unable to do what you wanted to because your opponent is smart enough to recognize what the Warp Spiders do. So yeah, I just think we're getting punished for playing high skill cap units like Swooping Hawks. The Fire Dragon nerf I can kind of understand because again we're coming into a meta that is very mech dominated, and Fire Dragons are good against things like aggressors, they're good against Custodes, they're good against Grey Knights, they're good against a bunch of these armies that are really good, and those armies got nerfs. So again, those I guess it's comparable, right? The Fire Dragons got nerfs and those armies got nerfs as well. So that might not be as big of a deal. I'm okay with spending 10 extra points, for 2 units of Fire Dragons. I don't know if I'm okay with spending all this, extra points on the, Dark Reapers, Warp Spiders, Swooping Hawks, Fire Dragons all combined, right? Somewhere we're going to have to cut a unit out of our army. And all those competitive lists using all these units, they're going to have to cut something. Especially Yvraine. Yvraine is a big reason why 10-pack troops work, and she's now more expensive. So again, this is competitive Eldar players having to cut another unit out of their army, and if we look at what replaces it, there's not a lot of good direct replacements, right? Like, what are you going to replace Yvraine with? Did the Vizark get buffed? No, he's still 90 points. So it's not like we can just shift over to the Vizark all of a sudden and say, hey, or, did the Autarch... No, the Autarch can't even join troops, so that doesn't even make sense. So scratch that. But you know what I mean, right? Like, troops didn't get buffed in any way, and they probably shouldn't, but still, there's no direct kind of equivalent to Yvraine joining a unit of Quins. It's just, nope, if you want to run that unit, you're going to have to spend 25 extra points. So it's a good unit, it's still good, but it's kind of unfortunate. So anyway, that's my thought. I think we're getting punished for that. And the other thing I've noticed is a trend of, GW just kind of nerfing, like not even really thinking about why a competitive Eldar list would include those units in the army, but just saying, oh, they're included, they must be too good, so we're going to nerf them. And that's it. And that's basically all the thought that they put in, right? So that's a little bit unfortunate. And, we were at a 47% win rate, kind of, and I think that the nerfs don't really affect that too much, but they certainly don't buff us. And really what it's going to come down to is how well our faction is at performing the secret missions and, playing the missions in Pry Nexus, which I think we're going to be great at. But because of these nerfs, don't expect Eldar to, surge up to like 56% win rate or anything crazy. I think maybe a couple percentages, and that's about it. Skilled Eldar players will still be able to use the army very well. Eldar players that, are, maybe more, a journeyman level Eldar player probably will use the army with the same kind of skill that they have been and, gradually, of course, get better. And then, of course, you have the meme Eldar players that are just going to run, random shit that they have. And they're probably not going to win too many games like me. But anyway. Okay, so moving on from that, let's go to the Dark Eldar and just see what is going on? Oh, by the way, Imperial Guard, some things got buffed, guys. A lot of their like vehicles and stuff got buffed. Basilisk got, and again, the reason why these indirect fire things are going down, like the Basilisk, the Death Strike, that's hilarious. Field ordnance batteries, stuff like that, is simply because they got nerfed very hard. So just think about it. They're basically not being able to use their lethal hits anymore. They're like X'd out of their army ability. So that's why they got the buff. I'm totally fine with that. That's fine. Rogel Dorn getting Rogel Dorn getting reduced is kind of stupid in my opinion, but there you go. I think the Rogel Dorn is fine as it is. Okay. Anything? Nope. Okay, so on to what we really care about. Of course, Black Templars. Some things got nerfed there. Oh, by the way, it looks like all the Gladiator variants for the Space Marines got nerfed. So there you go. Blood Angels, no nerfs for some reason, but I think they did get rules nerfs. Chaos Demons got some buffs. Alright. Chaos Knights got some buffs. Chaos Space Marines got a lot of nerfs. We kind of saw this. Warp Talons up to 135, plus 25 points per unit. That's huge. Legionaries up 10 points per 5. That's huge. Both of their Predators are up in points because they were so cheap. People were spamming them to death. Accursed Cultists are up in points. Raptors are up in points. Vindicator. This is funny. People were spamming this and now it's done. It's up in points. Dark Angels, we have Deathwing Knights and the Ravenwing Dark Shroud is up. I think the Dark Shroud nerf, for some reason it's listed it's still at 115. I don't know if that's a typo on their part or what, but there we go. Deathwing Knights are up as well, but they're also better now. Death Guard got a few of their characters nerfed, and looks like some of their stuff buffed. Anyway, Death Watch got some stuff reduced, but they're still going to be trash probably. Drukhari, here we go. Okay, Ravager got decreased by 5 points. It's okay. I think it's really a lot better in Yunari, especially with Fire and Fade or something like that. So really cheap 3 Dark Lance option. I think it's probably better than the Warwalker now for Yunari. Just having that extra Bright Lance. Yeah, you don't get the -1 to wound. Yeah, you don't get the 4+ invulnerable save, but it has more wounds in general, and it's going to be fire and fading. A lot of the indirect fire has been nerfed in the game, so I think the Ravager looks better, and also it's a long model. It used to spend a lot of movement to kind of move around, pivoting and stuff, and now it doesn't have to. So I think the Ravager is definitely a better option now. Grotesques are less points, but again, a Homunculus cannot join a unit of Grotesques. So it's still, to me at least, the unit just isn't that good. I know that some players have had success using Grotesques and stuff like that. I get it. But I just look at that unit and they're just, to me, they just look like a distraction Carnifex that you just kind of run up the board and, your opponent has to deal with them, and that's kind of their usefulness. And that's just not how I like to play typically, Eldar, factions, Dark Eldar and Eldar, but that's just me. Scourges got nerfed. Okay, so here's the thing about this. I know it's orange, which means a nerf and a buff. The only thing that got buffed is if you plan to take more than 5 models and you plan to use, the just Shard Carbine Scourges. So essentially, 5 models is up to 120, which is really expensive for the unit, but they are a move, shoot, move unit. Kind of makes sense. Here's the deal though, the full unit is 180, which means that each model is 18 points when you factor that in, right? Okay, and it means the extra 5 models are just an additional 60 points on top of it. Now this begs the question, do you save the 60 points and buy another unit, or do you max out the unit and just make it a little more durable? So some players might be thinking, oh, well, I might as well max the unit at this point. And I would still warn against that. And here's why. Whenever I've used Scourges, there's not many instances where the Shard Carbines are actually in range of anything. Now, the only thing I think might be interesting is in Yunari, if you want to use a 10-man unit, and you want to use 4 Splinter Cannons for a nice, juicy Blade Storm. That's about it. I think the fact that they're cheaper now in the 10-man incentivizes you as an Eldar player, maybe throwing Guide on them, and then having them just go to town on an enemy unit of infantry. I think that's a really powerful combination. However, we still also do have Coblite Warriors with Venoms that can do a very similar job. So, for less points, essentially. So it's up to you how you guys do that. I think that's something to consider. But again, I think 10 models going up there, you're going to have to fire and fade them afterward and use their ability to probably get them to safety if they're within 18 inches. So maybe it's just better to keep them as a 5-man unit still. But in Yunari, there might be an argument for a 10-man. And that's it. That's all that Dark Eldar, nothing got decreased or nerfed elsewhere. Which, I'm just going to mention something to you guys really quick, and, correct me if I'm wrong here. I love the Dark Eldar, but I feel like there were some things that maybe deserve the points increase, considering that the Eldar equivalents were also increased in points. For example, where is it? Oh, yes, Incubi. Incubi are used in pretty much every Sky Splinter list. Why aren't they 80 points a unit? That doesn't make any sense. Also, Mandrakes, why are they not 70 points? If Swooping Hawks got increased to 85, why aren't Mandrakes 70? Right? Now, this is a boon for Yunari players, because Yunari players can just say, hey, I want to take the Mandrakes at 65, save some points on my Swooping Hawks, right? I don't have to take the Swooping Hawks. Mandrakes essentially fulfill that role for me. So, I can't advance and score secondaries anymore. So, I'm just moving 14 inches and scoring a secondary if I don't use their ability. Again, so it might be pretty decent to just, in those types of lists, replace Swooping Hawks with Mandrakes. And in doing so, erase the tax that your Vrain is now costing you, which is an increased point cost, right? So I think there might be room for that. Same kind of thing with Warwalkers and stuff. If you're running a Yunari list and you're running Warwalkers, hey, you have a Ravager now. That's not bad. I was actually fearing that the Void Riven Bomber would get nerfed, but they didn't touch that, so good deal. There's only one player that I know of that plays Dark Eldar and runs Void Raven Bombers, so a couple, but one that has just won so many tournaments, it's almost hilarious now that it's almost not even a surprise, and you guys know who I'm talking about, but it's like it could run anything and win with it, right? Win a GT with it. So I'm hoping they're not just taking notes from that and just nerfing the faction based on that one player, but we do see some nerfs here, so there it is. We do see some buffs here, and we see one nerf, but we don't see nerfs to the things we would expect that every single Dark Eldar player are taking. So that's great. That's great for Yunari, and we'll continue to, be honestly really good with Yunari. So that's what I think of the Dark Eldar nerfs and buffs. I think it's fine. I think nothing changed here. I think this is probably what they should have done with the Eldar, is just kind of buff the units that really were not doing well. And, maybe nerfed like the move, shoot, move thing, and like maybe something else. Like, I could maybe see like a 5-point nerf to like Fire Dragons or something, but that's about it, So that's it. And then we have the other, it's funny. Genestealer Colt's got a lot of buffs and nerfs to different things. Grey Knights got some nerfs to their, Nemesis Dread Knights. Their players are just running 4 of them in a list, which is ridiculous. Castellan Crow and stuff, so they got nerfed. Imperial Knights got buffed because they needed it desperately. Leagues of Votann, no changes. I guess they were fine. I think they were exactly at 50% too, so they didn't really get any changes at all. So note to self, that's what you have to be at for no changes. You have to literally be at 50% win rate, and you have to have no units in your roster. So Dark Eldar and Leagues of Votann, I guess, kind of won out on that one. Necron's got some nerfs. I'll talk about these briefly. Doomstalker got nerfed to 145. Canoptic Rates got nerfed to 125. So I think they're up by 15 points per unit, if I'm not mistaken, or 10 points per unit. So they did, in fact, get a nerf. And when you combine that with the Satans not being able to, use Cosmic Precision for that 3-inch deep strike, that's a pretty significant nerf. So I think Necrons will be seeing a little bit less on the competitive side. Orcs got some nerfs. Let's talk about this really quick. Weird Boy got nerfed. Pain Boss got nerfed. Pain Boy got nerfed. That's pretty big. I think the biggest one, though, is Boss Snickrot and Meganob. So Boss Necrot was in every list, just running solo without his unit. He was just going in, scoring secondaries, killing things. He was an absolute insane model for what he costed, so they increased them. Mega Knobs, they increased, instead of for 30 points per model, it's by 10 points a model, guys. That's pretty massive. So the full 6-man unit is 60 more points. You're not going to see Bully Boys lists that are going to be as big as they once were. Let's just say it that way. Because they're going to be paying 180 extra points per army, which was essentially the cost of a whole Mega Knob squad before. So essentially the Orcs lost the Mega Knob squad. Or some characters. So Orcs players are going to have to choose. Do I want 3 big units of Mega Knobs armed to the teeth with war bosses, or am I going to have to do just 2 Mega Knob units and, some more regular units of like boys and stuff like that? So they're going to have to actually think about what they want there. I don't know. I think the nerfs, don't get me wrong. I think Mega Knobs needed to be nerfed, but they were nerfed by both their ability and by their points by 10. I think a 5+ feel no pain during WoW and like maybe like a 5-point nerf per model, so maybe like 35 points a model was like enough. I think that's probably where they should be at, is like 35 points. I think GW kind of overstepped this. I mean, don't tell Orc players I said this, but I mean, I think they overstepped that a little bit. I think the rest of the nerfs are probably fine, especially like Green Tide and stuff like that. I think, giving them the 5, not giving them the rerolls ones, giving them the 5+ invul when they're over 10 models is fine. Remember, they still have their WoW turn for a 5+ invul, so they're not losing a super amount of durability there, but they are losing a little bit. Especially in Pry Nexus, I think they really did need that nerf. But Mega Knobs being nerfed that bad? Oof. Well, we'll see. Maybe it's a preemptive Pry Nexus nerf. What else do we got here? Space Marines. Redeemer got nerfed, which it needed to because the Flamers were insane, and the Gladiators got nerfed, which we knew. Crusader got decreased because no one takes the Crusader. Repulsor got decreased. Ironstorm Spearhead, one of the, I guess, a couple of the enhancements got decreased. Storm Raven Gunship is up. So Storm Ravens, people were abusing Storm Ravens, and even so much that they would model the Storm Raven differently. No, I'm just kidding. For anyone who knows that little controversy, I guess somebody attached their Storm Raven a little bit higher than 5 inches so they couldn't be engaged when in hover mode. At least that's how the TO ruled it, which I thought was weird, because if I was TOing that event, I'd personally just say it counts as 5 inches and that's it. There's no model in the game that should be unassaultable if it's in hover mode and it's not actually flying, so that only flying models can target it. I think that's ridiculous. So to whoever that player was, if it was an accident, that sucks, man. If it was on purpose and you're a rules monger, then I'm glad you got banned. But the TO in any case should have just came over and just settled that with an easy nope, it counts as 5, and that would have been it. Space Wolves. Thunderwolf Cavalry got nerfed, I think by a considerable amount. I think by, if I'm not mistaken, 20 points per 3, which is pretty significant. So they're more expensive. Wolfen are more expensive as well. I didn't know what the problem with Wolfen is, but maybe they were too cheap for what they did. I think the big thing here though, is Thunderwolf Cav just being OP as usual. I remember when they first came out way back in like, gosh, I want to say like 5th edition, and they were just destroying everybody with 3+ invulnerable saves and 2+ armor saves and stuff, and it was nuts. They were just so bad, and they could be taken in like units of 10. But now they seem still OP, so they got nerfed again. Again, I've known people that complain about these guys, but I don't play them that much, so I don't know. Personally, in my opinion, they were easy to get around because Eldar have a lot of screening units, but if you run a really elite army, you don't have a lot of screens, I could definitely see this being annoying. Tau Empire got some buffs, except the Hammerhead. All their battle suits got buffs, which I think is fine because they were really expensive for some reason, and they weren't really that great. So I'm glad they got some, point decreases there, and then the Strike Team got a decrease, which is fine, actually. The Strike Team needed it. I think the Breacher Team was the one that was just, yeah, this one needs to be 100 points. They were insane. Broadsides got reduced as well. So good news for Tau Battlesuit people. Thousand Suns got a few points decreases on the units they never took anyway. So there you go. Tyranids. Okay, so Tyranid Biovores got a buff. They're not going to be played, guys. They're going to be totally useless. So GW saying, hey guys, we still want you to buy our Biovore kit. No, we're not going to buy it, GW. For all you Tyranid players out there, Biovores are now probably trash. Same thing with these, mucilid spore things. Anything with OC0 is basically going to be trash. I don't know if these mucilid spores have OC0, but probably because they're a spore, right? The Neurolictor is nerfed. The Neurolictor was probably one of the better Tyranid models. That is nerfed now. Ripper Swarms are, for one model it's 25 now, so that's a nerf. But if you buy them in threes, it's 50, so that's a buff. Again, Ripper Swarms are 0 OC. They're a swarm. So they're not really going to be used for what they were once used for. People aren't going to be playing these because they're not going to be able to score secondary objectives. They suck. So yeah, they're not going to be used. Turvagon, decreased. Okay, guys, here we go. Nid Swarm meta with 3 Turvagons. I am calling it now. We're going to start seeing that. And I know that Crusher, Stampede, and stuff got buffs. I know that they're like monsters got buffs. But in Pariah Nexus, I'm thinking something that can just spawn infinite Termagants is going to be gold, especially because the stratagem that basically creates new units is only once per game. But now I will say this. I don't know if that interacts with respawning. So basically, if you guys don't know, the Tyranid ability to, I think it's Unending Swarm, the ability allows you to either create a new unit or regenerate a unit that has been damaged. And I think if you regenerate it for however many CP it costs, then it's not once per game. You could do that as many times as you want, but the only time you could do it, but if you choose to create a new unit, then it's only once per game. Now, I think that's the case, but there might be a FAQ coming out on that, but who knows? All I know is the Turvagon can regenerate and create units of Gaunts, and I think it can do it unlimited amount of times. So there we go, Turvagons, great, still good for Tyranids, which I'm glad for. Tyranids needed it, and if you guys know the history of Tyranids in Warhammer 40k, they need to be good. Okay, they need to be at like a 50% because they've been so bad for so long, it's not even funny. Okay, so that's the points nerfs in general. I told you guys what I thought about the Eldar. I think we're still going to be good, but the nerfs were kind of like a low blow that I don't think we really needed those nerfs. But I mean, again, geez, I think actually we got the most nerfs for any Xenos faction, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units nerfed. Yeah, I think we got the most nerfs. But we also probably got probably not the most buffs. I'd have to count it, but we got some buffs as well, so that's nice. So yeah, that's it for today's video. I'll probably have a more in-depth kind of, not first impression kind of review of this later on that you guys can look at. And I'm glad this came out today. I was waiting for it for a long time, to be honest. And again, I'm sorry my content hasn't been out as much as it should be probably, but it's because I had some real life things and just different stuff I was dealing with. So anyway, lastly, I want to just let you guys know, thank you to, all my patrons and supporters who have helped support the channel over the last year and a half. Your help has really helped, and I can't stress this enough. You guys have really helped the channel come along in both viewership and also just, the level of content has improved as a result from you guys, essentially. I also want to just let you guys know that if you do want to support the channel via Patreon, I do have free trials activated. It doesn't cost you guys anything at all. It's just a way for you to join the Discord. We have a lot of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about, strategies or posting their, painted minis or conversions or whatever, and love talking about tactics and stuff like that. So if you want to join and do that with us, I'm very active on there. We have a lot of other active players as well who just love talking about the Eldar and how cool they are and different strategies and stuff and different lists. So if you want to come on there and talk to us, it is absolutely free. You just have to join the Patreon free trial, and of course you can cancel it before. Or if you choose to support, that's awesome too, and I really thank you for it, but you don't have to. So I'll leave the link for that in the description. And then also I'm an Amazon affiliate and I have a channel store page. The Amazon affiliate is just a link to different items on Amazon that you can get discounts for models. Of course, and I love Amazon for this because if something comes broken or there's a missing piece in your box, you can return it for a full refund. That's right. So if there's something wrong with the box, it's not going to be like going back to GW where you have to go through this whole process. They'll just give you the refund for it. You send it in, you get the refund, you get a new box. And I also have a channel store page. Now, what that is, it's just, a lot of, Craft World Eldar inspired designs that for all the aspects and all the craft worlds and stuff like that. So if you want to rep your favorite faction, the Eldar, at your local game store, I'll leave the link for that in the description also. And a little bit of the money from that does support this channel. It's not much, it's just a little bit, but it does help support. And I do think I have a discount code on there of about 25%. I think it's called Eldar 12, but you'll see it on there if you go on there and you follow the link. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today. Let me know what your thoughts on the balanced data slate are. I think, you're going to have some salty Eldar players out there. I was a little salty at first myself with the nerfs to aspects. I love aspects. Unfortunately, a lot of them got nerfed. But there are some positives, and I think in general, we kind of came out of this, if not even, maybe even better because of the mission rules and Prime Nexus kind of favoring armies like ours. So we'll kind of see how that develops, and let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Have a good one, everybody, and I'll see you later. Peace out, guys.